Welcome, everybody. This morning we're going to begin with our first hymn. This is hymn number 78 called Color and Fragrance, and it will be played by Jennifer McMillan. I just wanted to mention that the hymn was written by Norbert Chapik, and he is the creator of the UU Flower Communion.
Changing music will change us with them. Life within life, inner light gently glowing. Surely you seem to be God's vision growing. Oh, starry heavens, worlds of all splendor, suns without number, new life engender. Wheel in a wheel with the brightly glowing, moving in harmony, God's vision growing. Handful of pebbles, high mountain passes, depths of the ocean, dew on the grasses, great things and small with the light gently glowing, word of the wordless song, God's vision growing. Delicate beings, late swing and sparrow, in field and forest, clover and yarrow, life leading life with the light brightly glowing. None are too small to be God's vision growing. In human eyes burns the soul of living, illumines altars of loving giving, greeting we greet, neon light brightly glowing, share in a greater life, God's vision growing. Shaper of all things, to us you've given our chance to keep here on earth a heaven, moving in harmony, light gently glowing. May we be gratefully God's vision growing.
At Westwood, we acknowledge and express our gratitude that our building and local gathering places are situated on Treaty 6 territory. Recognition of traditional lands is an important first step in examining what we can do to actively honor the 94 calls to action in the Commission of Canada Truth and Reconciliation report. In line with the TRC report, and in light of the atrocities recently discovered at the Kamloops Residential School, call to action number 57 calls for public servants to be formally educated on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal Crown relations. We can all do our part by also educating ourselves as responsible and caring residents of these lands. Welcome to Westwood Unitarian Congregation. We're a welcoming community that embraces a free and meaningful search for truth. At Westwood, we support a culture that practices gentleness, inclusivity, and responsiveness to issues that affect our community, each other, and ourselves. My name is Lisa Stein. I'm your service leader this morning. Our speaker is Reverend Ann Barker. Our musicians are Jennifer McMillan and Rebecca Patterson. Our technical support is provided by Ilara, Stefaniuk-Gaudet, and Bill Lee. June is the celebration of Pride Month, and this Sunday is also a traditional service at Westwood known as Flower Communion. Although our meeting is virtual, this time of year fills our outside world with the promise and fragrances of spring blooms that can be appreciated and cherished for this brief, beautiful season.
If you have a candle or a chalice that you wish to light along with me, please bring it forward. We always use a rainbow chalice when we're in the building at Westwood, or rainbow candles in our chalice, and it's especially fun when it's Pride Week and we get to do that. Our chalice lighting words this morning come from, are an excerpt from To Wake to Rise, and here they are. We gather because we are hopeful, because we have visions and dreams of a brighter future. We gather because we believe in both beauty and justice, because we believe in both peace and love. We light our chalices this morning in the spirit of love. From Prayer of Reconciliation in To Wake to Rise.
At this time, we pause to reflect on our week and meditate on the milestones, joys, concerns, and sorrows in each of our lives. Community is deepened by sharing with each other what is in our hearts. We invite you now to type your joys and concerns into the chat as Jennifer plays the song. We also recognize and cherish the joys and concerns that remain in our hearts. While remaining muted, please join in reciting the affirmation. May the light of these candles inspire us to use our power to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to serve the spirit of truth in loving affection and trusting hope. Our congregation is entirely self-governed and financially supported by the voluntary generosity of our members and friends. Donations to Westwood are accepted and appreciated at any time by following the instructions found here on the screen, or you can also find them on our webpage. We now take this moment to celebrate the programs, events, and activities that we lovingly support. While remaining on mute, please join Rebecca in singing the offertory affirmation.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From together I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
Welcome this morning to our combination Flower Communion and Pride service, because there are so many things to celebrate in the month of June, and as the sun starts to come out and the light and the joy and the beauty all around us emerges. We begin with a video from our friends at the Fort Collins Church. Reverend Gretchen has created this video telling the story of Flower Communion. And so I hope that you enjoy it. I thought it was just lovely.
Nearly 100 years ago, the Unitarian minister Norbert Chopek offered his Czechoslovakian congregation a ritual to respond to their questions about how to be a community that welcomed rather than suppressed diversity. Czechoslovakia was a country formed in the aftermath of war, struggling just 5 years after the end of that war with questions of belonging and identity, trust and anxiety. Chopek's ritual took the traditional bread and wine communion that his community was too heretical for and too resistant to these usual symbols and played with this ritual. He turned instead to the beauty of nature all around them and invited each of his congregants to find a flower and bring it to the church one Sunday. That each person would find the flower that was beautiful to them was a symbol of their affirmation that each of us has a piece of the truth, our unique sense of what beauty means. On their way into the church, his congregation was in turn invited, each of them, to place that flower in a vase, which symbolized their free choice to enter into community alongside all the other people that saw beauty in their own way, symbolized by their flowers placed there as well. A free church where people freely choose to walk together across their differences. Once everyone had gathered, they'd bring the vase forward. Then the minister, Chopek, he would bless it. And then he'd invite everyone to choose a flower to take home with them, but just not the one that they came with. Again, this free choice affirmed each person's choice to be blessed by another and to receive with an open heart their different understandings of beauty, and to feel connected rather than divided by this difference. In this moment where so many forces seek to divide people, to play on our fears of differences and our anxieties of the other, here we remember that we freely choose to walk together and to be blessed by the differences between us and to see these differences as beauty.
When Westwood gathers in our building every June, we celebrate this very same tradition. We each bring flowers, and we have bonus flowers for everybody. If you didn't have a flower or you didn't pick one from somebody's garden on your way to church on Sunday morning, and we all bring flowers forward, celebrate the diversity and beauty of our community, which is such a good parallel to Pride, celebrating the diversity and the beauty of our broader community. And because we couldn't do that in our building this morning, we're celebrating with this colorful story instead. Now, some of you have come in colors or brought, if you have a flower in your window or you have anything you want to share at this moment, something that you love, something that is beautiful. I'm going to bring forward a flower I have. A Westwoodian gave me this awesome Miss Piggy vase years ago because she knows I love Miss Piggy. And another Westwoodian gave me these beautiful flowers, one of which is here today. Judy's saying she has extra flowers virtually for those who were unavailable to get them today. Sally Ann's got a gorgeous bouquet in the window there. Lisa's got a flower. Look at Ilara's window. Ilara, if you're, Ilara has their dragon in the window, their dragon book. Oh, and Lynn's rainbow hair. Dean's got anyway, beautiful backdrops, beautiful clothing, rainbow clothing, all the love and joy in our windows. We celebrate the best we can in the ways that we can. I invite you, as you go through the coming weeks and months, that every time you see beauty and color in your walks or your drives or your yards, that you think about all the unique and precious beings that those could represent. Now we have a second video for you. And when Pride comes along, sometimes there are people who can just say it better than I can. So while you'll hear my voice a teeny tiny bit in this video, I'm handing it over to PFLAG, because PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, is an organization that's been with us for a very long time. This is the National American branch that made this wondrous video. And this is just a piece of it. You'll hear how you can see more of them. But let's hand our Pride celebration over and our Pride learning over to PFLAG.
What makes Pride? We've been taught that pride is sinful, selfish, arrogant, deadly. But we know better. Pride is not deadly, hate is. Hate is the violence trying to make us small, silent, invisible, extinct. Pride is the extravagant, unapologetic embrace of our wholeness. Pride is the affirmation of our humanity. Pride announces we are here on our own terms. And for pride to be real, it must confront all the hate that seeks to destroy. Pride must battle white supremacy. It must end poverty. It must uproot patriarchy. Pride must liberate, house, clothe, and build. I am Melissa Harris Perry, and this month I'm partnering with PFLAG, the nation's largest family and ally organization, to lead a series of conversations with BIPOC, queer, and trans folk who are organizing transformational work in our communities. Join us every Tuesday in the month of June on pflag.org.
as we watch the story of Pride Together by PFLAG, think back at the same time to the story of the Flower Communion, about how each of us is a unique and beautiful flower, and how we are made stronger when we are together. And watch for the parallels in the story of Pride.
Welcome. I'm Melissa Harris Perry, and I'm your host this month for a series of conversations that we're calling What Makes Pride. Now, each week during the month of June, I'm going to be joined by leaders who are tackling critical issues facing BIPOC, queer, and trans communities through advocacy, activism, arts, and let's call it creative maladjustment. This week, we're taking up the issue of pride. When New York City police raided Greenwich Village's Stonewall Inn in the early morning of June 28, 1969, they probably expected to harass and harm the club's patrons without drawing much notice. After all, raiding sites of the queer counterpublic while subjecting queer folk to arrest and abuse was entirely routine police behavior in the 1960s. But Stonewall proved different. Patrons and community fought back, touching off a rebellion that lasted nearly a week and accelerating an uprising that persists to this day. The Stonewall rebellions were not the community's first collective act of resistance against discriminatory policing, state-sponsored violence, and economic exploitation, but Stonewall did prove decisive, marking a watershed in organizing and activism and birthing the annual Pride marches, actions, celebrations, protests, and proms that dot the globe throughout the month of June.
Think back to when Pride was new, when the protests were unfamiliar and a surprise, and the pressure was on to remain invisible. Remember when it was commonplace to say, "I'm fine with those people having rights to exist, but why do they have to flaunt it in the streets?" How not all flowers belonged at the front of the bouquet.
Joining me to discuss Pride and what it means today is a movement veteran, Jay Walker. Jay has been involved in activism surrounding LGBTQ+ and HIV/AIDS issues for over 2 decades. A founding member of Gays Against Guns, Rise and Resist, Sing Out Louise, March for the Dead, and a co-founder of the Reclaim Pride Coalition and the Queer Liberation March. Walker has, let's say, helped to produce a movement. Thank you for joining me today, Jay.
Thank you, Professor. Such a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm thrilled to see you. So can we start with Reclaim Pride? What is it that needs to be reclaimed?
So much. I'm a New Yorker. I've been in this city since 1985. The first Pride march I went to was probably 1987, 1988, as I was just coming out as a young queer man. And back then it was open. Pride was open, and it was about the movement, and it was about our rights. And at that time, it was about the AIDS epidemic, the AIDS pandemic, and the public was a part of the march. One of the early chants, long before I got to town, was off the sidewalks into the streets, and that was doable. I remember I was working in the book business at the time, and my partner at the time and I saw the group of gay authors marching by, and we said, we're going to march with them. And so we just got off the sidewalks and into the streets and marched. And that was something beautiful. And that was about community. And it wasn't about splitting people up into little subsections. And it certainly wasn't about corporations and corporate logos and throwing out corporate tchotchkes to the crowd. It was really about uplifting our community. And it was the sad part is, as time went on, and as we did start to gain some rights and some level of respectability, post Stephen Carrington and post all of the sort of pop cultural images of gay people, and as gay and lesbian and bisexual and trans people were really not trans people at that point, became more socially acceptable, we became a market. We became someone that corporations could sell to. We became someone that they needed our money. They wanted our money. And so that's when we started seeing the Pride, what was a Pride March, which was a liberation march, turn into a parade with, lots of floats, and go-go boys, and lots of corporations, and also tons of police. And then, it
Because
goes
all
from
right, so
there.
all right, so I want to dig into that, but before we do, I want to pause you there for just a second, because you said some things here that I find really challenging and provocative and important. So on the one hand, I want to say a parade can still have that kind of politicizing value, right? That to the extent that shame is supposed to cause you to exit the public sphere, then we could still see sort of simply announcing, right, one's existence, right, and one's right to exist as constituting a kind of political act. So I'm interested in whether it's if it's really about the sort of like focus away from policy, or if it's about this kind of corporate, economic, I love the way you talked about it, market, and then also the policing. So let me then hand it back to you.
Sure, it's a combination of all of those factors. We had sort of this sort of simultaneous shift happening in the city around LGBTQ people and around the way that the march was received by the general public and the way that the city government interacted with the march. And as the march became more popular, more societally acceptable, more covered in the national media, more politicians started marching. And of course, they wanted to march in the front of the march. And so they began to have this level of primacy. Then you had the police, who were having their own issues, right, with gay police officers experiencing discrimination on the job. They formed the Gay Officers Action League, which was really kind of heretical at that time, for the police force. And so then it became about having the Gay Officers Action League march. And somewhere along the line, the police marching band ended up in the parade. And that's the point where it became a little bit too difficult. In addition to that, during the Giuliani administration, we had the bike rack barricades became a huge problem with the parade, meaning that the entire length of the parade was barricaded off along the sidewalk, along the curb line, meaning that off the sidewalks and into the streets
couldn't happen anymore, right? You can't, if you've got police building barricades there, then you actually can't get off the sidewalk and into the streets. So I can hear, I'm a Southerner, I can hear a crew of folks who are in my community who I love saying, well, what is it that he wants? I mean, do you want to be accepted or not accepted? What is the goal then of Pride? Now, I bet I have some answers, but I want to hear from you. Why would it be a problem to discover that you've got politicians in the front and the police marching band coming along behind?
Those things in and of themselves would not be a huge issue if those politicians weren't caving to special interests that were oriented against the parade. For instance, for years, the parade's had lots of different routes over the years, but for a significant amount of time, it marched from the upper 50s on Fifth Avenue, down Fifth Avenue, and into down to the Village. But a problem with that was that during the HIV/AIDS crisis, that march was going past St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is the sort of living embodiment of the Catholic Church in New York City. And so what we ended up having was for a while after the AIDS activists, started doing actions in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral and on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral during the march, we suddenly had the elected officials deciding, okay, well, I'm going to join at 46th Street.
At the cathedral.
I'm going to join after the cathedral.
So that I don't have to walk past the house of the Lord with queer folk.
So I won't be associated with whatever those AIDS activists would act up or are going to do in front of the cathedral. And so we had that aspect of it. But then our Black and brown, queer and trans bodies were continuing to be policed, even though we were decades after Stonewall. And so this just kept getting greater and greater. The corporate presidents kept getting larger and larger. The city began to dictate, and the police department specifically began to dictate the route of the Heritage or Pride Parade, which is the traditional. So that route kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller until in 2019, or rather in 2018, it was literally this tiny little horseshoe going from the going from Chelsea to the Flatiron, so literally limiting itself to 2-3 neighborhoods, whereas before it had gone in this wide swath through Manhattan to show that we are everywhere, and they just constrained it and constrained it and constrained it because they didn't want to deploy all of the people needed to have a large march.
We are everyone, and everyone is us.
So what I love about the story you've just told is that it represents in this space, in this moment, in this one set of actions, right? Actually something that is symbolic of the broader movement, right? That rather than massive resistance, right, what authorities bring instead is a kind of co-optation, a marketing, a constraint, right? And so there's still this need for reclamation from that, because that kind of co-optation does not in and of itself constitute liberation. So what I want you to do for me is set the table a bit on the most critical issues facing queer and trans communities, and particularly at that intersection of racialized, marginalized identity or immigration status. You have ACT UP at the center, right? In the story you're telling about the beginnings. What are the core issues now?
There are so many, because we are everyone. And everyone is us. And if there's one thing that that our communities have embraced over the course of the last 4 years, is this sort of intersectionality in the way that activism functions now. It's the kind of the way that activism functioned in the 1970s, right? After that period of Stonewall and Black liberation and Black power, and the folks from the Gay Liberation Front after Stonewall partnered with the Black Panthers and demonstrated outside the women's prison where Angela Davis was being held. It was about marginalized people coming together. And then sometime in the late 70s to the 80s to the 90s, we all got torn asunder. And you had everyone siloed, and everyone, the environmentalists were over here, the gays were over here, the Black people were over here, the Latinx people were over there. And then suddenly in 2016, 2017, we all had a common enemy again. We all had the living embodiment of the man.
45. Bringing together people.
Bringing people together all over the place, all over the world. And so, from that resistance, I think that a lot of the queer movements sort of re-engaged with the wider population, with the wider identities, and that's what the Queer Liberation March has been about. It's been about disability rights. It's been about immigration rights. It's about trans rights, and trans rights the way they are affected by the state, and trans rights in the way that they are affected by the community. We talk about deadbeat dads all the time, not paying for their kids' expenses. What about the deadbeat parents that kick their queer and trans kids out of the house when they're underage? Nothing exists to help those kids. The carceral system, especially in relation to trans people, is a huge, huge problem. Just with misgendering, with housing people inappropriately, with the incidents of people being put into solitary confinement because the corrections officials don't know what to do. We're also dealing with immigration issues and queer and transnational relationships where for the last 4 years, prior to the current administration, they simply were not recognized. There are just a host of issues, and some of them are specifically about being queer and trans, and some of them are about being Black and the way that being queer or trans amplifies the racism that Black people are feeling, or being Latinx, or being Indigenous, and the way that things get ratcheted up because queerness and transness are a part of the story. So it's a wide variety of issues.
When I was a seminary student at Meadville Lombard in Chicago in the Hyde Park neighborhood, Melissa Harris Perry was a member of the big Gothic Unitarian cathedral, really. It was a beautiful big church just across the street from where I went to school. And so I had the pleasure of meeting her there. And at this time, I think about how when I came out as queer, which is really not all that long ago in the grand scheme of things, I came out into a Unitarian community that was welcoming and accepting and loving and caring. And I didn't feel oppressed, and I didn't feel rejected, and I didn't feel harmed in that process. And of course, there's been bumps in the road, but I've had it pretty easy. So my choice this morning to share that video with you is to amplify the voices of people whose experience really needs to be addressed now, who need to be lifted up, and give them the stage, because what they have to say is more powerful than anything I could ever tell you from my experience. So we close the sermon portion of this service this morning with this reading from Teresa Inez Soto in, my favorite book, Spilling the Light. I know that you are hungry for justice, and sometimes when you fail, it feels like the times when you open the refrigerator door, look inside and close it, nothing having met your appetite. But there is always trying again. There is the fact that one just act is the beginning, and together we can build another. The gnawing hunger for a different future is one that we feed in the present. Your diligence, your tenacity, your willingness to learn, not just know, but also do. Hunger shaping how you nourish, feeding one another with the long spoons of your compassion until you're strong enough to feed the part of the world that you can reach. Blessed are the hungry, by the Reverend Teresa Inez Soto. And my hope and prayer this morning is that all of us find ourselves off the sidewalk and into the streets. Blessed be, and amen.
I am that great and fiery force, sparkling in everything that lives, in shining of the river's course, in greening grass that glory gives. I shine in glitter on the seas, in burning sun, in moon and stars, in unseen wind, in bird and trees. I breathe within both near and far, and where I breathe there is no death, and meadows glow with beauty's strife. I am in all the Spirit's breath, the thundered word, for I am life.
Our chalice extinguishing this morning is again from To Wake to Rise, from the prayer of reconciliation. May the strength of this time together help us to walk forward. May the wisdom of this experience help us to know our path. May we have the courage to return as often as necessary until our way is clear. May we have the perseverance together to see it through. Blessed be, and amen.
And now our closing hymn, number 395, Sing and Rejoice, played by Jennifer.
living now. Sing and rejoice, 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 let all things living now sing and rejoice.
Thank you, everyone. We're so grateful to have had you with us this morning.